Welcome to the Open Adoption Project. This is episode 83. We're the Nelsons, and I'm Lynette.
And I'm Sean. In today's episode, we have an interview with Robert Reese.
Robert is an adoptee who was born in South Korea and was adopted and grew up in the United States. He was adopted when I think he was 4 months old.
Yeah.
And so he spent the majority of his childhood here in the United States. And he shares some of the ups and downs of that and what searching for his biological family has looked like. And I don't want to spoil anything, but it's really just so emotional for me every time I hear these adoptees, especially international adoptees, talk about the emotions of finding their biological family. It's so beautiful and touching, and yeah, it was wonderful to hear from him.
So we'll jump to our conversation with Robert Reese. Okay, well, we are now on the podcast with Rob Reese. Rob, thanks so much for being with us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
We're really glad that you're here with us. Go ahead and take a moment and introduce yourself so our listeners get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, so I'm Rob. I grew up in Denver, Colorado. I was not born here. I was born in South Korea, and I was adopted by a family here in Denver when I was 4 months old. I lived just outside Denver, working in management, and just finished up getting my BA in business and management, and starting my next chapter in life. So that's what I'm doing.
Awesome. Just as a side note for our listeners, Rob and I grew up not too far apart from one another, so it's kind of fun to have some of those connections. Well, Rob, take some time and help us understand your experience as an adoptee. Share your story, whatever you'd like.
Yeah, so like I said, I was born in South Korea. I was adopted by a family here in Denver when I was 4 months old. My birth parents, they were very young. They were pretty young, and they were not married. And they decided to go with adoption. My birth mom decided to go the adoption route, and she had to deal with social norms, in South Korea. If you're a single parent, if you're a single mom, it's not socially acceptable. And, on top of being a single parent, that's nowhere near easy, to say the least. So she had to deal with that as well. So she felt like adoption would have been the best route for me. And so I spent the first few months of my life in foster care. I was in in the foster system, and my parents here, they couldn't have their own biological kids, so they decided to adopt, and they were matched with me, and they were very, very, very excited to finally be parents. It's been good to kind of find my own birth family. I started my journey officially when I was about 16, and I didn't find my birth mom until I was 17, and that's when her and I started all those conversations. And it's interesting to get to know her. It turns out she is married to another gentleman, not my birth father, but they have 2 sons. So I have 2 younger brothers that I had no idea were around until a few years ago. yeah, they seem so nice, and they seem so eager and willing to get to know me as much as I have wanted to get to know them. And um, my parents and I were going next summer, summer of 2024, to South Korea to not only tour the country but to also meet um, my birth family for the first time. And we're so excited for that. We are so
Awesome.
excited to meet them and get so many of those questions answered, and to see how they live life, and for them to kind of see how I've lived life. And um, yeah, it's been a great journey. It's been an emotional journey,
I bet.
but it's definitely a journey that I am glad that I started later in life, because I can now better enjoy and understand it. So um, yeah, so that's how I came to be.
Well, I have a couple follow-up questions about your story before we jump into lots of other questions. But so you said you started searching when you were 16 years old. What did that process look like? And then how did you actually connect? How do you actually meet one another or get reunited?
Yeah, so I was adopted through an agency, and I had to submit this application saying that I was interested in finding my birth family, and um, that I wanted to know where they were, and I was interested. And I had to give like my case number, me expressing that I was interested. And because I was under the age of 18, I had to have my parents
Yeah.
show their support, that they're okay with me finding my family, which they have always been. My parents, one of the many things I love about them is that they were always so supportive if I wanted to find them. If I didn't want to find them, they were supportive of that as well. They were supportive of any decision in my adoption. So they had to show their support. Um, and so I sent that application to my agency, and then my agency found my case number and all the documents that they had on file, and um, they gave me all that information, and they were then in contact with the South Korean government to find you know contact information with my biological mom, and to find out where she is, what she's doing, how she's doing, all of that. And it turns out a few years before I submitted my application, she had gone to the South Korean government to try and find me.
Hmm.
And that made it more satisfying, knowing that she also wanted to find me as much as I wanted to find her.
Yeah.
Um, she um, she always wanted to know where I was and how I was doing. So it was, her now knowing that she went to the South Korean government years before I started my journey to see where I was. That made it not easier, but more comforting in a
Yeah.
way, you know. So um, I'm glad it worked out that way.
And so did you get her contact information or did she get yours? Was there a phone call? Like, how did that? I'm just
Yeah,
trying to imagine what that
yeah,
connection looked like.
yeah. So at first, our first contacts were through letters,
Okay.
and so she would send letters to the government, South Korean government, and then the South Korean government would then like translate it because it was all in Korean,
Yeah.
and I am not fluent in Korean, so and she's not totally fluent in English, so the government had to translate the letters and then send the letters to my adoption agency to then send it to me.
Wow.
And that was kind of our way of communicating for the first few years. We also had email addresses. We had our email addresses on file, and so we would send emails to each other every few weeks, and we would get those emails translated, and um, that was definitely a quicker way of communication.
Yeah.
And so that was our form of communication for the first few years. And then I would say I was around 20, 21. I decided that I wanted to have complete, direct, full communication with her, and and she was on board with that as well. And ever since then, we've been communicating through social media, and we've been communicating through through Zoom and doing calls, and as often as we can.
Cool.
And yeah, it's amazing to see how far we both have come. From letters every few months to every other day of through social media.
That's really cool. And I only imagine that you're maybe learning some Korean and that she speaks some English, or that's kind of starting to come together a little bit easier.
Yeah. We have both been teaching each other the languages. She's been helping me with Korean, and I've been helping her with English. So it's been good to be each other's language teachers.
That's
We
fun.
and we've truly bonded over that. And yeah, it's been a work in progress, but it's been amazing. It's been
That's
so good.
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I love how you were both searching, that probably a lot of things, miracles fell into place so that you connected, and now you're developing this really great relationship. I'm also really excited that you're going there next summer. We're connected on social media now, so I'm expecting to see some pictures in a year. But wonderful. Well, we have a lot of people that listen to the podcast from all over the adoption constellation, right? Other adoptees, we have biological parents, adoptive parents, and then just friends and family of people that are in that world. And so we have a lot of questions that we'd love to ask you that will potentially help this community understand a little bit more. Is it all right with you if we just jump into some of those?
Yeah. No, I'm an open book, so
Okay.
whatever you want to know.
Okay. So, you shared part of this in your story, but how do you feel like your adoption experience has shaped your life and who you are today?
It's being an adoptee is something that I've always known. Like I have no idea what it's like to not be adopted. That's such a foreign thing for me, and so I've always had an interest in adoption. I've always have seen the world as being this big thing to see, and to see as much of it as possible. I want to get more rooted in my culture. And the thing about being adopted is that, I can say that I have two families. I have the biological family where my birth mom, gave birth to me and brought me into the world. And I have my adopted family who raised me and cared for me and loved me just as much. And so I've always, viewed, my family as being two families. And, for me, I've always enjoyed hearing other adoption stories and knowing that I'm a part of that as well. And I have my own story, and, my two families are unique in their own way. And, that's something that I have always felt in my life, and it'll probably be something that I will always feel in my
Yeah.
life, So
Yeah.
yeah.
So you said something really interesting in the beginning of that answer, that, being an adoptee is all that you know, right? And you have no idea what it's like to be a biological child of your parents, right? But I mean, now that you're connected to your birth family, maybe that is starting to feel a little bit different. But thinking about just your experience as an adoptee, if you were trying to help somebody outside of the adoption community or somebody who just didn't know, what would you want them to know or understand about the adoptee experience?
That there is so much beauty in adoption. There's so much good in it. Adoption is such a beautiful thing, but there's also, hardship. There's also some low moments, and there's is not always rainbows and good. I know I've struggled with, with my own identity at times, and I would want someone who is not in the adoption community to know that, yeah, adoption is of course a very amazing thing. It's very beautiful, but it can also be hard at times. It's not always easy. Um, from the adoptees perspective, and maybe for the parents perspective as well. I'm sure there's of course amazing highs and some lows, I'm sure,
Yeah.
um so that's something I would always mention to someone who might not be in the adoption community, is that there's highs and there's lows.
What do you wish your adoptive parents and or the adoption community had known in retrospect?
I definitely wish at least my adopted parents, they've been so supportive in every aspect, of my life and my adoption. But, I wish that they knew that, wanted to go at my own pace. There was times before I officially, started my journey where I decided not to do it. Um, I would be interested in finding my birth family, and then a little while later, I would, change my mind and say, I don't think I'm ready yet. But yeah, I definitely wish that it was more at my own pace early on. Um, but yeah, I don't think they meant it in any bad way at all. So
Yeah,
yeah.
I feel like we've heard similar things from other adoptees that we've talked to, but the emotions around adoptions kind of ebb and flow. They change, and it's fluctuating over time. And what you feel good about in one moment may change a few minutes later. And so, as the adoptive parent or other supportive people in the adoptive community, we need to be more understanding and flexible as well, because it's not maybe as black and white as those of us who are not adoptees may imagine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So another question we like to ask adoptees, because you've lived the experience, and I love the kind of different variety of answers we get, though, is around adoption education. And maybe again toward those who are considering adoption or who are, jumping into this right now. What do you wish adoption education looked like, or that those individuals would learn as part of that process?
Yeah. Yeah. I know what helped me out was every summer my parents would take me to a a camp called Korean Heritage Camp, and it was
Cool.
up in Granby, and at the YMCA Ranch up in Granby, and um, I went there for 12 years growing up, and it was a big part of my life, and um, the last year I was there from 2005 through 2016, and I actually went back, you know, back this summer to be a counselor there to help give back, and yeah, it's something that I've always loved growing up, especially in terms of education and learning. Um, I think it's so important for the adoptees to remember and learn where they're from, and to know that it's okay to be interested in where you're from, culturally, your own families, like it's okay to, if you're interested in finding and learning about your culture, like that's an amazing thing, and you're allowed to be curious and interested. So
That's
I
awesome.
always, yeah, and I always encourage going to like those kinds of camps, and or going to like conferences and learning about what it's like to be adopted, you know from anywhere in the world, and adoption in general, and um I always encourage that, for new parents, for new adoptees, that if you're interested in finding out where you're from culturally, that there are resources out there that will really help, because there that camp for me was a big resource for me growing up,
Yeah.
and yeah, it really helped me out.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, we have a family cabin not far away from there, and I never would have imagined that would be a place where that's happening. Beautiful location, and really cool that you were involved into that for so many years, and that you've now gone back to, like you said, kind of give back. I imagine that you know you're now reconnected with your biological family, and I imagine all of that experience has prepared you to understand more about how to better connect and understand the culture a little bit more.
Yeah, yeah, it's now knowing that I am in communication with someone where I'm from, it makes it a lot easier, and it makes it more interesting, now knowing that I'm not just from South Korea, but I have family, and in contact with them. It's now I have an extra piece of motivation to get to know where I'm from, and
Yeah.
learning, you know, the history of South Korea, the rich history of how that country came to be, and the daily life of those who live there, and it's and all the food, and all and the learning the language. It's such an interesting thing, and I definitely, now that I'm older, I am definitely more interested in it.
Yeah.
When I was a kid, I was like, yeah, I'm from South Korea, but I definitely did not. I was not as interested in getting to know the culture I was just living life as a kid. But now that I'm older, I'm like, I should definitely find out more where I'm from.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, you told us a little bit about your reunification story, how that all happened, which was really awesome. And I'm curious, you also mentioned a little while ago that you felt like sometimes you struggled with your identity. How do you feel like maybe that reunification has helped some of those struggles?
Yeah, it's definitely helped so much. You know, I um, I struggled with my own identity and my background. I struggled with grief and anger, and I was angry at the world for being adopted, and um, you know, I was definitely not a good headspace because I was adopted for a period of time. But now that, I am, in contact with my birth mom, and now knowing the reason why she put me up for adoption, I can now better understand why she did. Um, and, you know, she had mentioned that she never stopped loving me, and she never, um, not a day went by where she didn't think about me and was wondering how I was doing. And knowing that she never stopped loving me and always wanted to know that I was doing well, like that really put a lot of that tension at ease. Um, you know, for a long time in my life, I thought that, it was the exact opposite why she put me up for adoption, that she didn't, that love wasn't there, you know? So that was my mindset for a long time. And now knowing that she has always had this love, and that she put me up for adoption with only the best intentions, that definitely, um, you know, I definitely put a lot of that anger behind me, and now I um, want to get to know her a lot more, and yeah,
Yeah.
um, I'm not as I'm not angry at the world. I'm not angry at her. I'm not a parent, so I cannot imagine, you know, the struggle of that decision. But, now knowing that she did it all, she made that decision, out of love. It really helps. It definitely helped my identity, and knowing that that's what she wanted
Yeah.
because it was best.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why this kind of analogy is coming to my mind, but um, I mean, if you've ever put together a puzzle without looking at the picture,
Mhm.
and especially if it's a very large puzzle, it can be really frustrating not knowing what the greater picture looks like, even what small aspects of the picture might be. But when those puzzle pieces come together and it starts to form a little bit more clarity, you get a bigger understanding of the whole picture. And that's
Mhm.
kind of the mental or the imagery that was coming to my mind as you shared that. Like little pieces of your story come together. You thought that it was one thing, but now it looks differently.
Mhm.
And the bigger picture is starting to be more whole. Not that it's a beautiful picture, right? But it's more whole and more easy to digest and understand.
Yeah. Yeah. It's for a long time, I was looking at each individual piece, for a long
Mm-hmm.
time in my life. Um, and now being, being older, now being an adult, um, I have learned to take a few steps back and look at that picture, that puzzle as a whole. And now I can appreciate that view. I can now, see it better and understand it better. Um, and yeah, it's when you're, at least for me, I can't say for anybody else, but
Yeah.
at least for me, it was so hard for me to look at the whole picture growing up. It was, it was so easy for me to look at each individual thing and each individual aspect and question that specific aspect so much, instead of looking at the whole grand scheme of things. It was so, it was so easy for me to just look at each individual narrative, if you will.
Yeah.
And, um,
I think
you know,
that's human nature.
yeah,
uh,
yeah,
as we mature, as we get a little bit older, I think we have a little bit more ability to do that.
yeah,
So yeah, don't be hard on yourself about that, because I think
yeah,
that's an every person thing, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
Um, what would you say are some of the unique challenges or even opportunities that you've faced because you're an adoptee?
I know one of the challenges that I did face was, in school when they had those projects of where you had to do like your ancestry and
Yeah.
like your family tree. Everyone in my class like knew where they were from and their ancestors and their family tree. I did not have that. And I could have done, my adopted parents and like my grandparents and aunts and uncles and all that. Um, but at the same time, I was like, yes, they are my family, but they're not my biological blood family. And so that was one of the challenges I remember facing. Um, uh, Another challenge that I have faced was with language. I've been asked many times if I'm fluent in Korean, and I'm not. And of course, I always wish that I was fluent in Korean, but I'm like, no, I'm not. I'm not fluent. I know very, very little Korean, and um, I always kind of joke that there's times where I can barely speak English. None, Nonetheless, learning and speaking, a second language. Um, so that was one, struggle that I remember having to explain, a few times in my life. Um, I, yeah,
Yeah.
those were really the main, physical struggles I would say that I had in life. I other than that, I was, a normal kid, regular kid, and I, you know, I was definitely fortunate enough to have family and friends who didn't see me any different because I
Yeah.
was adopted. They all knew that I was adopted, but all my friends growing up, they never saw me any different. They
That's
never,
cool.
yeah, they never, really asked about it. They knew about it, but they never, were like, hey, are you okay being adopted? I'm like, they never, because they didn't want to like get pushy or anything, so I was definitely fortunate enough to have friends and family who were like, yeah, we know you're adopted, but
Yeah.
it's okay.
Are both of your parents Caucasian?
Yes,
Okay.
they are. Yeah.
So transracial adoptee, right? So it's apparent when you're with your family that you were adopted. Did that ever, was that ever negative, or did that ever bug you?
I not really. I knew that I was not biologically related to them. I knew that I, look different. And um, yeah, and my parents were so supportive and like, hey, like, yeah, you're definitely South Korean. Um, and I knew, my whole life, as far back as I can remember, I knew I was, I looked very different, but, um, and not just with my parents, but with extended family.
Yeah.
Um, um, there is one family member that I have who is Korean. One of my aunts on my mom's side of the family. She is from South Korea and grew up in South Korea, and um,
Cool.
that's actually the main reason why they adopted from South Korea, was to say that, when I got older and I looked around my family, I can say that I have someone in my family who looks like me, and you know is from the same country of origin, and yeah.
That's cool that your parents thought of that,
Yeah.
that you would have some type of racial or cultural mirror uh,
Hmm.
available to you and your
Yeah.
family.
Yeah, I appreciate it from them. I always have.
That's awesome. Are there any like special resources or networks or communities that have been helpful for you as an adoptee?
Yeah, the big one was that camp. That one, and I know there's so many all over the country, and um, and that camp was my main slash go-to resource for me
Mhm.
growing up. Um, you know, the the people that I've met there, over the 12 years that I was a camper there, you know, I still talk to so many of them, and they're all adopted as well, and they, you know, I still consider them friends and family of my own, and you know those 12 years there, I really enjoyed connecting with people and learning about you know the Korean culture, and knowing that there's other people out there who are in my same scenario, and even though we all have different stories, we all know what it feels like to be adopted, and so that was my main and go-to um, resource and connection, was that camp every year.
Cool.
And yeah. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, like was it like a week long camp or was it more than that?
It was a weekend.
Okay.
So it was always, for me, it was always the weekend of Father's Day weekend.
Okay.
This camp does other cultures, like they have a camp for like Chinese adoptees. They had a camp, I think, for like domestic adoptees.
Okay.
I know for like a long time they had a camp for like if you were from Cambodia. Um, but all these camps are like a weekend, a
Okay.
Thursday through Sunday.
Nice.
Yeah.
And I love that. And over time, I mean, I imagine you made connections there, but then were you connected to some of those people outside, like emailing or social media type of things with those people that were now part of your circle?
Yeah. Yeah. The, the, the guys that I was with, in my group, um, during those 12 years, those guys and I really had a good connection over those years, and we really became really good friends. And I still talk to them through
Awesome.
social media, and um, I've been planning to go see one of them sometime soon.
Cool.
And yeah, so we keep in contact through social media, and um, yeah, it's good to see that we're still connected after all these years, because life gets busy. They're all busy. I've been busy, so it's been good to see, you know, that even through all of life that we still want to keep connected, and to see how we're all doing in life, and seeing each other's successes and accomplishments. We still want to be there to support each other, even though we haven't seen each other in a while, you know?
I really like that. And I hope that there are resources like that available in lots of places around the country. And it sounds like from your knowledge that there are.
Mhm.
But yeah, I would echo your encouragement to adoptive parents, especially if they're adopting internationally, to make
Mhm.
sure that they provide opportunities or an option like that. That's
Yeah.
really, really cool. Is there anything else regarding your adoption or your experience as an adoptee that you'd like to share?
I would definitely want to have other adoptees know, and other, adoptive parents know that, yeah, I have had a really good upbringing, lots of love, lots of laughs, um, and that, yeah, I've struggled with it and with my adoption, and it's okay to struggle with it. It's um, I would hope I would, or at least if there's an adoptee or adopted parents out there who are struggling with adoption, you know you're not alone, and you know there are resources and people out there who would love to help you out, and and even if it was just listening, and I've kind of been willing to give that offer out. I if any adoptee or parent or parents who are thinking of adopting or who are going through the process, I'll always listen. I'll always, you know, offer my point of view, and answer any question that I can give to help.
Awesome.
Um, and it's good to have those perspectives.
Yeah.
So
So if someone's listening to this podcast and they want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
you can find me on social media. You can find me Facebook, Instagram. My so Robert Reese is the best way you can find me. Um, I'm really active on social media, so you can find me at Robert Reese.
Okay, so we'll put links to your social media in our show notes for today's episode, so
Yeah.
that if people want to connect, they can.
Yeah.
Well, Rob, thank you so much for being with us today. I think we've learned a lot from your experience, and we're just grateful that you're willing to share.
Yeah, and I appreciate you having me here. It's truly an honor, and I'm grateful that that you've had me on. I'm truly grateful to be here.
Awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to Robert for sharing your experiences and your feelings and story with us. We are so appreciative of you and the wonderful people who share with us here on the podcast. It's such a great way to learn and grow together.
Yeah, I thought that there were a couple of great things that stood out to me from my conversation with him. One was that his parents did a really good job at trying to immerse him, or at least connect him to his culture, so he felt that as part of his identity. And also
the camp. That was so cool.
Yeah. And also on the same lines, the fact that he has an aunt that is also from South Korea, and that his parents thought through that before choosing which country to adopt from. so that he would have both racial and cultural mirrors in their family. Like, I thought that was really cool.
Yeah, we've talked before about the importance of having mirrors like that. That was really neat. I also loved how his adoptive parents were so supportive and open to his searching, and that he was able to start that search even before he turned 18. Most of the international adoptees we talked to who are about the same age haven't found their biological families yet, and I loved that things worked out for him. It made me so happy for him, and also I loved that he was able to start that early enough that they've met and are going to meet in person soon. I thought that was beautiful, and it was just tender. His feelings on that were clearly very, very tender and sweet.
Yeah.
The importance of having that connection just really reiterated through his experience for me.
Thank you again, Robert. We're so grateful for your willingness to share with us, and thanks to each of you for being a listener to the podcast.